too much with South Africa or the other persons. But comparing it to our own progress, we have the progress we have made till this point in time, the plethora, the number of observer teams we used to have, briefing over our shoulders when we wanted to register ourselves in terms of coming out the normal voters register. The processes we have tried over the period, the improvements we have talked through and then added, all of them manifested in one way or the other, making it very difficult for incumbents to have their way, or for anybody wishing to have a deviant approach to the process to succeed. As you rightly mentioned, we certainly have a few issues still sorting out, but I believe that we'll come out of this one stronger than when we started. And then the process for 2028 will be much better than what we had in 2024.
All right, thank you very much. Let me come to you, KSM, right? And General was talking about comparing 2024 to 2020 election. 2020 election. Would you say that 2024 has been successful compared to 2020? As your opening remarks.
Yeah, definitely. I think, interestingly enough, the period before the election, it looked scarier than it was the period before the 2020 election. The pronouncements were very, how would I put it? Very provocative, very grandstanding. Those were the kinds of pronouncements that were happening on the campaign stages, the platforms. But I must commend the Ghana Peace Council. They were quietly working behind the scenes and checking on politicians who were making pronouncements that were not very conducive to smooth elections. Quietly. They didn't do this publicly, but they were working quietly underneath, calling them to order. So before the election, the pronouncements made it look very, very scary. It was like, wow, is this thing going to be a smooth election because of the grandstanding? And so that kept people on edge. But surprisingly, as it got closer and closer to the election, I guess the speed, the peace council stepped up, whatever they were doing. There were less and less of those kinds of pronouncements, to the point where you wouldn't hear anybody on any platform talking about maybe if it's MPP, we can never hand over, or the NDC saying we will make sure we don't go to court. We're going to settle this thing at the polling station. It became less and less, going towards the election, to the point that it died down, really, But there's always suspicion when there's election coming in. What will the role of the EC be? What will happen to the national security? What will happen to this? Because of previous experiences. There were fears that things might not go the right way. But we were all very, 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 very happy to see more or less a very smooth election. Of course, there are always pockets of violence. There are always pockets of little violent acts that are distasteful. But overall, it was pretty smooth. And here I have to commend the outgoing vice president, because even before the Electoral Commission had announced what the official results were, people were getting on edge in terms of what is the outcome going to be. And for some strange reason, by some stroke of genius, the vice president decided to come out even before the election. The Electoral Commission had mentioned the results and said, listen, we know the deal. We have our own people collating, the NDC have their own people collating, and I can tell you today that there's no way I'm going to win. So he gave his concession speech even before the Electoral Commission came out with their announcement, which I thought was such a brilliant move, because it calmed down tensions. And I can imagine that if he hadn't come out and we were going to wait till 72-hour normal, regular time to get the results, I don't know what would have happened. So he did well coming out that early, and that was a true mark of statesmanship and that we really are serious about this democratic thing, you know. So I think overall it was yeah.
All right, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of all the things that you have said. Let me go to Dr. Lawrence Tete, right? Would you say that based on what Mr. KSM had just said, the election on the whole was very successful? Dr. Lawrence Tete.
I think it goes without saying, and let me say a very, very big greetings to all of you on the platform, especially my brother KSM. I think that to me is a shame. He's my big brother, but I forgive him. We'll talk about by and large the election was successful. I think Ghanaians proved that we make noise, but we know how to put ourselves together. And for me, having had the privilege to witness in other, I felt very proud to be a Ghanaian. Of course, there were pockets of unfortunate incidents that happened, which was expected anyway. But by and large, I think we did very well. And giving 1 to 10% and 90% of something we did, that was very good. Behind the scene, I must say, though, there were a lot of work that we did. And like my big brother KSM rightly said, not only was the Peace Council working, the religious bodies, Christians, Muslims, at one stage, it looked as if we almost reduced ourselves to a religious election. And we wanted to shift from that to be able to vote on values. So the religious leaders did a lot of work. Some of us were on radios one. We should be patting ourselves at the back that Ghana has done very well. Of course, we could have done much better, but in my view, we've done very well because I've had the privilege to witness a lot of elections in Africa, and I know how they have ended. I can tell about the Liberia one, the Sierra Leone one, the Ivory Coast one, the Rwanda one, and even the Kenya one, where some of us were stuck there for a long time before we were able to go out of the country. So I think we should be congratulating ourselves. And those of you who are not privileged to be here, those of us who had a chance to vote can tell you that we did well.
All right. Thank you very much.
Now, having said this, can I please just say this? I don't know when this program finishes. What was the end time? How long do we have to be on this program?
Limit, but
how long do we have to be on this program?
Yeah, for 2 hours, right? It depends. But if you have to attend to something, we can excuse you. All right. Let's Dr. Akwete has joined. Dr. Akwete, it seems like
I have to go preaching. So
sure. We'll allow you to go. Dr. Akwete, we're talking about opening remarks in terms of the success of the election. It seems like we have come to accept a certain level of violence, right, in our elections. But irrespective of that level of violence, right, still the election could be considered to be successful based on what has happened so far.
Just a minute and a minute. Yes, I answer. Yes. Can we describe this as a successful election?
Yeah, in terms of your opening remarks.
Yes, to a large extent. It doesn't mean that there weren't. We hear some people died. The numbers are disputed one way or the other. In certain areas, fights took place, brutalities, and so on. But generally speaking, it was an election, especially the time within which we got candidates declaring, "I've lost, you have won," and then moved on. Okay, moved the nation into a different. The expectations were that it was going to be a very violent election, and so much was expected and feared. So you had the police, the armed forces saying what they would do, Inspector General, the commander or the head of the armed forces, chief of defense staff. They were telling us things about how they want to ensure law and order. We were also told about parties having armed vigilantes. It's not like we saw the troops all over, but the idea of violence intensified when the governing party said, "I deserve a third term, you know, and they were going to do everything to have a third term. This came up earlier than the election year. And people got up and said, hey, what does this mean really? And then the Peace Council was also involved. You had a situation where the NDC said, if you do not meet certain conditions, especially the impunity of violence, they said in the 2020 elections, a lot of people died, about some say 5, others say 6, others say 7, and so on, and nothing has happened to the perpetrators.
Yeah.
And so,
Dr. Kwete,
so what I'm saying is that the violence part of it is a perception, but also to a limited extent, violence occurred. And police said they've arrested a lot of people, would prosecute them, and so on. So we couldn't say that is the ideal Ghanaian voting that we got in the 90s and before 2012. Elections was relatively peaceful until 2000, after 2008, when by-elections became very violent. Akwetia, Chiwa, and Talensi, and others. And nothing happened. The impunity that they could be violent and so on. But in our history, it's been the case. That's why the idea of one-party state came about. But that didn't succeed. And then the military came in and all that. The brutalities went with it, but it wasn't a party system. So by and large, yes, there were expectations, then there were fears, you know, that are we going here because the two-term cycle which the voters have come to use to determine whether you can go beyond a second term or not, was under some stress, you know, and from the two major parties, and people were concerned given the context, political, economic context of the election. Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. Let's go into the discussions, right? So I've sent you narratives, right? Narrative have been assigned to each person. Now let's go with the first narrative, which is for Dr. Nyama, right? So you have read a narrative. So this is what I'm going to say. Now, Dr. Nyama, during our discussion on June 7, 2024, election discussion on the topic, multi-party democracy, political entrepreneurs, and the challenges of coalition government in Africa, you shared the view that the proliferation of political parties is good for strengthening Africa's democratic consolidation, but with the caveat that there should be the regulation of these political parties in the political market space. In Ghana, there is not just the proliferation of political parties, but also the emergence of independent candidates. Now, my question to you, since political parties serve as institutions and structures for identity politics, would the rise of independent candidates in the political landscape contribute to minimizing the level of identity politics in Ghana? And what account for this proliferation of independent candidates? But we've seen Chada and we've seen Afafranto. Right. So I want you to discuss that particular issue, the rise of independent candidates.
Well, listen, you know, I'm a pluralist. Let 100 flowers bloom. If people want to run as members of a political party, let them do so. If they want to run as independent candidates, let them do so. Independent candidates are not going to be successful, but they can shift the policy agenda, the debate. They can become single issue candidates in the United States. You remember Ross Perot, who was all against NAFTA. That was his thing. And he forced the main candidates to moderate their position. So you can run as a protest candidate. You can run as a single issue candidate. You're not going to win. You're not going to win the election, but maybe that's not what you're about. And you talked about current crop of independent candidates. If you go, I remember in the 1979 election, or the Diamond Adis and the Kwame Nyantes and all that stuff. They brought different issues and different qualities to the debate. I don't think that a democratic system should legislate who gets to participate and who doesn't get to participate. Let people exercise their rights. If they want to do so in a political party, great. Political parties are important because they aggregate interest and they articulate policy on a broader scale, and they can actually put the infrastructure of governance together better than an independent candidate. But if you want to run as an independent candidate and you want to champion a particular issue, I'm all for that. I don't think that you can expect to win an election. Now, if there's a movement behind it, as you saw with a guy like Peter Obi in Nigeria. He's not just run as an independent candidate. No, on his personality, he builds a third polka party in Nigeria. And Ghana can do better than just having this duopoly, because a duopoly is very, very restrictive. Now, I want to see, viable, parties that are actually, contesting for power, not some kind of, quixotic thing where you think that you're going to win the election. I understand Alan's case is a little different. He was in a party, it didn't work out, and he left. This is the first time we've had that. We had William Ofuriatta, the same thing. The PFP, it didn't go his way. He formed his own party. He probably cost Victor Usu that election, but that's part of the game, and everybody is allowed to play. I don't think that the polka system should restrict who can participate and who, as long as you meet the certain requirements. So we don't want a Blamieza type candidate coming in with all kinds of dubious qualifications. So there should be rules for everybody. But I think that let people participate the way they want to participate, as long as they don't cause us any trouble.
All right, thank you. Let me come to KSM, right? I listened to one of your shows where you were talking about the first force and second force and third force. Do you think the coming in of independent candidates did contribute anything meaningful to our political development in terms of Chada and Alan Chimatin? They came as independent candidates. So first they were talking about a third force. But would you say that the two candidates did contribute anything towards having a third force instead of what you call a duopoly that Dr. Newama just raised?
No, my position has always been this. There have been cries for a third force, and I always counter with, where is the third force coming from? These are the same Ghanaians that we meet every day, the same Ghanaians that go to church with us, the same Ghanaians that go into politics. It's the same Ghanaians. So when we say we are looking for a third force, are we looking for somebody coming from outside the Ghana entity, or that's what I always ask, what do we mean by a third force? I'm saying that there should be what I call the first force. And the first force are the people of Ghana. And if we, the people of Ghana, are enlightened enough to make judicious decisions during elections, that will constitute the best force, so that we can say, we don't care whether or not you stayed in the government for 4 years, you didn't do well, please step aside. Or you stayed in the government for 8 years, you did so well, we don't mind if you come a third time. I'm looking at a force that will put the government on its toes, that will pressure the government. Because right now, as we have in Ghana, it's okay, let's come to a decision. It's 8 years, 8 years. At the end of 8 years, so you can go. You are in for 8 years. The next, is the only other one coming. No, let's forget that. Let's the people of Ghana be enlightened enough to decide who should rule. And I think that, to me, will have a better impact on national development and nation building than picking between two people.
Okay.
Who knows that I can do my 8 years, and then next, now you come back and do your 8 years. Let the people decide.
Thank you. Yeah. Let me come to you, General. Right. I want to find out, what are the national security implications, knowing very well that funding political parties in Ghana is very, very expensive. The government does not in any way help political parties in terms of financing their campaigns, right? What are the national security implications that we will have that money, right, backing some of these independent candidates, since we don't know the sources of their funding? And the Electoral Commission does not have the capacity to be able to track how they are being funded. What are national security implications of this?
Right. So the implications are many, and we can't list all. But the most important thing is that I think the highest risk is that we may possess our democracy, but not own it. If we are not able to trace the sources of funding for the political parties, I mean, as you can see, even for you to win a primaries in Ghana, it's not easy now at all. You certainly would need a lot of money to be able to win the primaries. So you may have persons who are, I mean, who would do well in politics, who are not able to join the political race because they don't have the funding. So if we would have our best materials not joining the race because of the lack of funding, we have to decide really how to go about the funding. If the situation remains as it is, and I doubt it will change in the next should I say generation, if we are putting it by 30 years, I doubt seriously whether it will change. Money would still play a very, very significant role in who, I mean, gets to lead us. And as you rightly mentioned, I mean, the NACO business is still around. I mean, you have people prying for opportunity for all sort of investment, dubious or genuine. And if they are able to really fund right up to the grassroots level, we would say we are a democracy, but we don't own the democracy in reality. So that is the biggest national security risk, because it then becomes almost an existential threat to our democracy. So the democracy will be there, but it will be dictated or manipulated by, I mean, those who have what it takes to keep people in office. We see it all the time when it comes to even district level elections. District level elections, you can't walk there with your free hands and get elected because you are the most eloquent, the most knowledgeable, or the most popular in the community. Popularity wins no longer elections in Ghana.
All right, let's come to you, Dr. Akwete, right? From what General just said, what are the implications? What are the implications in terms of our governance and democracy if we have independent candidates who we don't know their sources of funding? How does it augur well in terms of our democracy? Because we don't know their source of funding. The Electoral Commission is not able to even audit their book to know where their source of funding are coming from. How is that a threat to our governance and our democratic dispensation?
I think it's a very serious issue. In all established democracies, funding is the critical focus of state agencies. You can talk about the IRI in the States, but so would you see it in Europe. Chancellor Kohl, the most celebrated chancellor of post-war Germany, was removed from office when the police reported that he hadn't declared expenses he made in some elections. I've not checked the record, some 10 years ago or something. And that was an offense in the law. We've seen in Israel, political party prime ministers go to jail because they did not fully declare the sources of their funding. And we've seen it in the US, where even candidates were disqualified because they've misused funds that were contributed towards their elections. We have none of these mechanisms in Ghana. There is no regulator of funding elections, not only for funding elections, not only elections, but also even after elections. How do parties survive? Okay, and how do that period after elections is for public policy and their implementation to address the challenges facing their voters, whether it's a job, whether it's healthcare, whether it's just raising living standards and earning more and so on and so forth. We have no institutions tracking any of these things. And there is evidence that contrary to the law, the parties do not account for their funding, where the sources of the funding and the quantum of it and so on, to the EC. And the EC seems to lack power, any strength to do that. But in all democracies, where you see the state in play is that you must declare the source of your funding and it will be investigated. And if you violate, you're going to get into trouble. There is no such institution or mechanism or even some kind of custom in Ghana. But all democracies have institutions that do not only check funding, but they have institutions that also constrain what parties should do, but also the state finances them. The Westminster Foundation, for instance, finances parties to undertake the annual summer public policy issues of parties. And when we had looked deeply into that, we found that the civil service actually, apart from Westminster, listens to them carefully, and at the end of the day, draw on that in defining various policies, whether it's health, whether it's education, and so on. So there is state funding of parties, not for elections, but to develop their public policy issues, which the civil servants look at. So by the time you say you're coming to power or something, they know what you think, what you do, and they prepare to support what you're going to do. We do not have that. And the reason why we do not have any controls, we did not anticipate the emergence of the duopoly in 2008, and nothing was done about it. But the design of the executive arm has defined our democracy as a hybrid rather than the fully developed multi-party system. It's a hybrid because it's only the president that is elected on multi-party basis and parliament. And then the president has total control over the executive because opposition parties are banned.
I think, hold on, I hold on to that thought, because I read a publication on Ghana Web, which has to do with the 75th New Year conference. That
yes,
yeah. So I have a set of questions for you on that, right? Where you make that distinction, right? So let's hold on to.
I've dealt with that question, isn't it?
Yeah, I read that thing, so I have that question for you. Let me go to Dr. Lawrence Tete briefly, right? Dr. Lawrence Tete, you are coming from a religious perspective, where we know identity politics in terms of whether it's religion, ethnicity, or sectional interest play a key role in Ghana politics. But if you look at the independent candidates, especially Chada, he wasn't campaigning on identity politics. So don't you think that the likes of Chada will augur well as independent candidates for our democracy? Because he was not engaged in identity politics in terms of religion, ethnicity, or sectional interest. Don't you think him as a candidate, even though he was going to win, his campaign was good for our democratic dispensation?
I think that it goes without saying that our politics should be based on values and not religious grounds. I've said that, and I've always said that. There's a regular program I hold on TV every Thursday with the spokesperson of the chief imam. And my stand is that, yes, as much as I'm a Christian, I'm a cleric, I'm a clergy, we should not be basing our voting pattern on religious life. We should make sure that we're able to vote on values. And I think that is what this time around is happening. Even though a lot of people look at Baumia as a Muslim and John Mama as a Christian, the truth is that they were all from the north. They were Northerners. On a normal circumstance, people would have even tinted them to the same area, but people voted on value. And we need a lot of Christianity and a lot of Muslim, a lot of religious bodies will speak a lot of jargons, and that is not what we need to build a nation. So really, the Christians themselves are coming together. And this time around, the religious leaders came together in a massive united front to be able to look at certain basic needs we have as a nation, and not just from the religious point of view. Of course, it is clear that most people would think that because of the landslide and the fact that the other candidate was a Muslim, that is why he went so. But I think people are looking at values. And of course, don't forget that after the 8 years rule of NPP, there were a lot of question marks on the minds of people, which needed to be cleared. And for me, this is a wake-up call to NDC itself, that at every given stage, if you are not able to provide for the nation as required of you, you will be voted out. The place of Cheddar and Chemartin and others is fine. We are in democracy, so everybody have the right to come. But whether they even have the right messages, it should not just be sentimental. Our messages, once again, I want to say, must be based on values, so that people who have critical issues, we should have a say and why we need certain leaders. Then we can have leaders that will rightly be able to serve the purpose of the nation. And for me, this has always been my stand. As much as I'm a Christian, I'm a pastor, and I'm a religious leader,
It is not just based on religion, based and thinking about value. There are a lot of people who didn't have messages. I must say most of the independent candidates didn't have a message. Some of them wanted just to hear their own voices and to be registered. And that is why we need even a...
Okay, I think we are having a problem with Dr. Lawrence Tetteh's
regulatory body to be able to candidate on, and not just a solution from a religious point of view.
Okay, all right, let me come to you, Dr. Nyong. You have the last word on this narrative, right? If you listen to Dr. Lawrence Tetteh very carefully, he's making that most of these independent candidates, or you mentioned that these independent candidates are never going to win in any way. So it comes back to my argument that it is a matter of just political entrepreneurs who want to take advantage of the system.
But which politician is not a political entrepreneur? They're the same. They're not that, it doesn't bother me too much. And you were suggesting that somehow Shada didn't do identity politics. He did identity politics. His identity was that, he's this rich guy, and that he can do something. All politics is at this level is about identity, but it has to be more than your own identity, because you are trying to get other people who don't share all aspects of your identity to vote for you. So you need to have a message that's bigger than your in-group. And I don't think there's anything wrong with bringing your identity to the game. You are marketing yourself, your expertise, your beliefs, your values, all that stuff. It's all fair. If people like what they see, they will vote for you. If they don't like what they see, they won't vote for you. That's the essence of democracy. I don't think that they pose any real threat. The bigger question that you were asking about where they get their money from, that is more troubling. But I don't think that any of these independent candidates spend enough money to change things, because they were not going to win the elections. So yeah, they may be getting their money, and we should do a better job vetting them. But the other question is, if the main parties, where do they even get their money from? And if you look at the incumbency advantage within parties, how was Mahama able to win the nomination? Because he had money from his time in government. How was Bawumia able to win the nomination? Because the incumbent president supported him, and it's always about money. So we have to have rules about, how much money you can spend, where you're getting the money from, all of those things. But independent candidates are using their own money, or they're using money from some other place. The people in the main parties are also getting money from, I've been asked to give money to candidates from the main party who are running for elections in Ghana. And I'm always like, isn't there a violation of some laws? And there are no laws. So it's what we put in is what we get. There are no laws. I couldn't, for example, if I was running for office in the United States, I couldn't go to Ghana and solicit funding. I'll be in trouble. But I see Ghanaian politicians come here all the time, and they ask for money. So if you don't have rules, then nobody's breaking them, because you don't have rules. So if you're worried about that, then put in place rules and put in place verification systems and enforcement mechanisms to make sure that foreigners or people with all kinds of dirty money don't get involved in the game. But you have to spend money, and they're going to get it from someplace.
All right, thank you very much. Let's go to the next narrative, right, which is directed to Dr. Lawrence Tetteh, which has to do with post-election promotion of religious peace in democratic consolidation in Ghana. So I sent a narrative. So Dr. Lawrence, this is my question to you. Given your position as a renowned religious leader of the Christian faith, how has political actors whipping Christian doctrines, values, and sentiments to Ghana votes and the prophecies churned out by some religious personalities every election cycle, how has that contributed to consolidating or undermining our democracy in Ghana?
I think that, as I said earlier, in the past, we have been very, but the truth now, the religious leaders and to Rata Juton, of course, we saw Bawumia come to many churches and was saying hallelujah and praise the Lord and everything. And you have to be discerning to know that this is just to win political vote, because there's no way he's going to be a Christian anyway. And then we've also seen Christians go to the mosque saying Allah Akbar, the Shanlao and things. And so people are waking up now from the naivety. And I think there's been a lot of teaching now from the Christian front. As I said before, we took everything for granted. But now people are realizing that the people who shout
Dr. Lawrence,
That's the stand from which President Ronaldo come. In God we trust. The battle is the Lord's. So people are waking up that politicians are not walking the talk. And I think that is a wake-up call. And when they stop to walk the talk, then whatever they say becomes just a mouth talk and not walking indeed. So I think the religious bodies have woken up now. Of course, it's taking its time, but having gone through what we've gone through in the past 32 years, people are beginning to be enlightened that we cannot just use our platform to be swayed off by politicians who do not even believe in our ethics and what we believe in. And one good example I can give you is decision on LGBT and how much it shocked Christians and Muslims and religious bodies in totality in Ghana that His Excellency President Nana Dankwa Akufo-Addo would not even spearhead himself, let alone even append that signature. So those are the things that is making us wake up now. And I think we need to be educating our people that we should not just be shouting hallelujah. But the Bible said the beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. I think the wisdom part of that
I think we are having
aspect that we've lost sight of. Hope you can hear me, man. Please, can you hear me?
Yeah, Dr. Lawrence, your line is, can you take some time to fix your line? All right, we'll get back to you. Your line, it breaks up a little bit. But let me go to Dr. Akwete, right? Dr. Akwete, let me come to you, right? We've not had, when we talk about peace, we've not had this religious conflict in terms of Christians and Muslims. We've not had that, like what we see in other countries. Most of the conflict that we've had, right, is about young people, right, engaging in violence, right? And we can identify certain areas or certain hot spots. Now, if you look at the signing of the peace pact this year, for example, right, when the NDC was dragging their feet in terms of signing it, it has to do with accountability. When you are talking about peace, peace goes with justice. Looking at what happened in Techima, looking at what happened with Ayawasu West Wall, we are talking about peace, but we are not able to hold the perpetrators of the violence accountable. How do you talk about peace when we cannot have leaders who will be able to hold people accountable? And how is that good for our governance system?
First of all, I'd like to explain that the Peace Pact is not about promoting impunity. It's not. It simply said we saw a trend emerging from 2008 where the two parties, the duopoly, emerged, and they were not expected to emerge the time they did. So there were no regulatory rules there like you have in the economic sector. There was nothing to regulate them. And these two parties, with their historical traditions and competition and everything, then became quite formidable in elections that had foot soldiers initially, who then became later on what we call them as vigilantes, armed, whatever you call it. And there was no, it was with impunity. Nobody was arrested and punished. They usually disappeared. We claim that the two parties were promoting this kind of thing. But that has been the case also in our history. In the 50s and the 60s, why we became one party state was violence and whatever. So I think what we were doing with Peace Pact was saying that don't resort to violence when you lose elections or something. Go to court. And the court system must lay out the framework for people to resort to the courts for justice. And they should then cultivate the idea of developing the systems, whether it was the handbook that the Chief Justice used to give, what is the process by which expeditious action will be taken on stolen verdicts, okay? And the court should do that. Don't bring armed youth onto the streets to fight that. So it was not just the peace pact. The peace pact was also balanced in a way, or coupled with what we call the National Peace Summit, which is that when you go to court, there are procedures laid out to go through your case, the evidence, and so on. But you cannot say because you lost elections, you are calling troops from here and going there and shooting people and so on. That's not democracy. So these are two things. We wanted accountability, but within the legal framework. And peace comes from justice. And we saw too much impunity. However, the focus on the presidential election, you see, then left a vacuum where the question is, so if you are not the president who signed the peace pact, like we saw in the North in the 2020 elections where some people were killed and so on, or you mentioned Ayawaso West Wuogon. Ayawaso West Wuogon was a by-election, but what happened in a commission set up to look at that, event, the Milshort's Commission and so on, the recommendations, the government didn't just without some impunity, didn't pursue the people who had to be pursued and under the law and maybe dealt with. So I think there is this sense of peace pact being some game of no. The essence is go to court, but we also mobilize citizens to ensure that you go to court. So in the case of the 2012 elections, which led to the first peace pact and then getting them to go to court, when we saw that NDC, MPP were threatening, even before the judgment, whether they would assess the judgment or not, we did what we called the Peace Summit, brought Ghanaians from all walks of life and said, if you go to court, you accept the
Your volume, please check your volume.
automatically muted. So,
yeah.
so it was to cultivate this, that going to court, abiding by it, but also getting citizens to buy into the culture of saying you accept the decision of the court, you don't burn the country, you have another time to compete. And that is what it was essentially and has been.
Okay, let me come to you, Brigadier, right? Listening to what the submission that Dr. Kuti just made, he said, go to court, go to court. We know that during the 2020 elections, there was that slogan, right? And everything go to court, everything go to court, everything go to court. Now the NDC made it very clear that they are no more going to court. They are going to battle it out at the police station, right? So my question therefore is, now these political parties, the violence inure to their benefit, both political parties. When there's violence, it's inure to their benefit. So he also mentioned the issue of vigilante groups, right? I think last 2 weeks, I did raise the question of vigilante group, right? Now, we had the Vigilante and Other Offenses Act, right? The point was to punish these vigilante groups, but we did not find ways and means to do DDR or SRR to get all these people jobs. How does that become a threat? These vigilante groups, even though they have been disbanded, they have been incorporated into the security agencies. Would you consider that to be a threat? Because we didn't get a question, we didn't get a response to that last 2 weeks. Brigadier, what's your thoughts on that?
Okay, so I don't have the evidence that the vigilante groups have been incorporated in the security services and not the public service or the civil service. I mean, we can make all sorts of allegations, but at least somehow a bit of evidence is always required. Who are the members of the erstwhile vigilante groups? They are youngsters, they are Ghanaian youngsters. That's maybe the political class used for their various, services or their various security requirements. And somehow, after the coming into being of Act 999, we did see that somehow we had dispensed of their usefulness. But truth be told, we did not need Act 999 to deal with the vigilante groups. This country has enough laws that can be invoked to punish people who are disruptive of public order. And if we believed that the vigilante groups were a disruption of public order, we have sufficient laws to have them dealt with. But having said that, symbolism is very important. Like senior brother, Dr. Akwete just mentioned, the signing of the peace pact. If you ask me, it's just one of the rituals in the process. Act 999 is one of the symbols or the rituals to tell us that as a people, we do not want to contain vigilante or disruptive activities to our electoral process. We take vows either before the altar, in court, and the like, and we act otherwise. We are still the same people also in the the political fray. So the vigilante groups and the services they rendered to political leaders were rendered in 2024. They may not have been as violent as one would measure in the past. What do? Those you call the vigilantes are those who drive the political leaders. They are those who hold their water. They are those who get them their food. They are the errand boys of the political leaders. How many parliamentarians did we have vying for for office? Each of them couldn't, crisscross either the country or even their constituencies, driving themselves. They needed people to go ahead and then do logistics arrangements for them and the like. Those errand boys are all part of their vigilante groups. So being honest with ourselves, we realize that services that maybe the state might be required to provide for political leaders, the state is unable to have those things provided. So somehow those vacuums must necessarily be covered. Maybe one day you can talk about, with your friend Alex Khan, you can talk about the role of the private security services in Ghana. Do we have need for them? Why should they exist if the state can provide all your security needs? Because you pay your taxes in any case. So the state should be providing all your security needs, but it's not possible. So in 2028, I bet my last CD that you still have, a manifestation, maybe not in a violent form, of the presence of what you call, what we conveniently call vigilante groups. But as I mentioned, because of the existence or the passage of Act 999, somehow it manifested the willingness or the desire of Ghanaians to conduct their electoral process without being disruptive or entertaining disruptive, groups. Because they sprang up not out of the blue. They sprang up because, for instance, when you take, what happens typically on an election day, remember the country is about some 328,000 square kilometers. You don't have a police post in all these areas. And the population density in some of the places is very sparse. You have to transport maybe some of the sensitive material in terms of for the elections and the like. At times, you have to rely on a private motorbike, which is not provided by the state. So the constraints faced by the state itself makes room for some of this, whatever it is, activities to take place. Not least, the inability of the state to provide for our total security requirements. She certainly desires to provide 100% of our security requirements, but it will remain impossible for a long while. So yes, it's important for us to have symbolic things, signing of pacts. It's important for us to have acts passed. The number of acts and laws we have around that we do not enforce cannot just even be described as mind-boggling, but they are there. But as I mentioned, the good part of it is that it's a manifestation of the desire of the Ghanaian people to have a very peaceful process. devoid of disruptiveness when it comes to their elections.
Okay, okay. Now, Dr. Nema, let me come to you. Listening to Brigadier's submission, right? He's also making the argument that, right, we have a vast land, we have a vast area that we don't have security personnel at certain areas. So vigilante groups, in one way or the other, will be very good in terms of policing some of these areas. But what we are talking about is political vigilante groups, right? Who laws have been passed to disband them. How do you identify a problem? You try to come up with a solution to the problem, but you are not making what? Avenue to be able to accommodate these people. I think that is the issue that we are talking about. Vigilante groups are good in terms of securing other areas that government is not able to be, but political vigilante groups who are there to intimidate, to cause violence is what we are talking about. So after you pass the law to disband them, then what happens to them without doing DDR?
Well, if you disband them, you need, because they are Ghanaians, you need to be worried about what they're going to do. But remember, even when they are vigilantes, they're not, all of their economic needs are not being met by these, polka bosses that hire them to do violence. And so the bigger problem is, why are they even available to be recruited into these groups? It's because they don't have jobs. And sometimes they don't have jobs because they don't have the right qualifications, or they can't start a business, all those things. So if you can address those problems, those young people are not even available to be recruited because they are gainfully employed. And so as long as you have a bunch of young people, unemployment for young people in Ghana is twice the national average. So that's a real security problem, because the devil finds work for idle hands. And so somebody's going to go and recruit them to go and beat up somebody. But if they had a job, that would not be a problem. But let me step back briefly and talk about what it means for electoral security. First of all, you don't want to privatize security. You want the state to be the one that is doing all this stuff for all of us. Great. The only caveat that I will give is that in places where the incumbent government, which is in Ghana's case will be a polka party, has captured the state security apparatus, then vigilantes can counter that by remember, being vigilant doesn't mean that you have to be violent. It really means that you just have to be aware, stay focused. So if the incumbent government has captured the security agencies, you want the opposition parties to have somebody there to watch and verify and make sure that they're not doing something nefarious. And so in that case, they can provide some service towards making the election more difficult to be rigged. But that's not how they are often used. They are often used to intimidate, opponents, to do all kinds of other stuff. But my argument is that they are available to be recruited because they don't have economic opportunities. So if you want to address that problem, now that you can do operationally, you can pass laws and you can arrest them, and you can have some type of, you're talking about, DDR, security sector reform, have something for them to do. But in terms of the structural aspect of the problem, you got to provide jobs for young people so they are not available to be recruited into this, security labor force. And because those people are just using them, many of those people will end up, being terribly disappointed once the guy that they support comes to power, because they're just using them. You saw here in the United States, people that did violence on behalf of Trump, they ended up in jail. He's going back to the White House. Some of those people have been in jail for 2 years, and he says he will pardon them. We will see. But that's how it is. So if you don't want people to be recruited into vigilante groups, find them jobs, fix your economy, make sure that they're not available to be recruited by nefarious politicians.
All right, thank you very much. Let me come to Dr. Akwete, right? Let's assume that if Bawumia has not considered the election earlier on, and the election has become more contested, wouldn't we see these political parties releasing their political vigilante groups? Wouldn't we see that?
Well,
even though
yes.
Even though you are claiming that they have been disbanded, but if it got to the point where it has been highly contested, wouldn't we see them on the streets?
Well, there were reports. There were reports from research. You know, the northern part of the country, Burkina
Damango, we saw
Faso,
something in Damango, right?
yeah, and the conflict in Boko and other places shows that there has been influx of weapons, even from the Togo side of it in the north and so on. So we are dealing with this problem, with jihadists also trying to go in and all that. So there were a number of factors. But I think that the most important thing here is that we did not see the scale of violence we anticipated or we were afraid of, simply because we had the police have a new approach, telling us they will be backed by the army, and they even developed a situation room and had a way of knowing and doing their policing work to know where the violence would occur and how they could step in. And as we are speaking now, there's a very interesting case. There were 4 areas that violence occurred, and results were contested and so on, and they had to be suspended or something else. Now, the police is saying that from their intelligence, those areas could explode into violence if elections were held. So the politicians usually would go in, they would bribe, but there's violence in Ghanaian elections. However, this time the police are saying, well, why don't you come and vote in the police college where the police can provide security? And that's a discussion going on. But I think what is really important is for us to see that the police are beginning, and the armed forces that backs them in the National Election Security Task Force are beginning to find other ways of dealing with the threat of violence in our system. It's real. And whether the politicians will support it or not is a matter that, we all is a conjecture that we must consider. But I think by and large, we did not see the violence also because, and I think for me, that is where I commend Vice President Baumia for conceding in a very timely manner, so quick. It's never been the case in the history of the country that he could do so quickly. And once he did that, I think he only understood why it was so important to come out when even the parliamentary election results were not out in the way expected. I suspect it preempted some violence. He might know he's vice president and so on. So we need to interrogate that. But it had been helpful to the country in a way that, yes, declaring that and so on probably helped the police and other allied security forces to manage the situation. It could have been worse because we all heard about armed vigilantes and this and that and so on and so forth. It's new to us, but it's been significant that it moved the country. I had a leader that probably didn't want this to happen and moved quickly, and then it changed the atmosphere or the context of these elections.
All right, thank you very much. Let's go to the next narrative. Using the Ghana Armed Forces as a passive commentators. When we say passive commentator, it simply means we're using the armed forces in the enforcement of civilian law, right? So let's come to you, General, right? So let me ask you this question. I sent the narrative, right? Can you first explain to us, our listeners, the involvement of the military in the electoral process as legally justifiable according to the Ghana's constitution? How is the use of the military justifiable under the constitution? Brigadier.
Yes, so I'm here.
Yeah.
You want to know how the use of the military is justifiable
under the constitution?
Under the constitution.
Correct.
Article 210 sets up the Ghana Armed Forces. In it, it's very clear. The traditional role of the armed forces is clearly stated. The provision of the territorial integrity of the countries of the country. And if you read 2103, it tells you that the Ghana Armed Forces may be used as a developmental tool of the country by the executive arm of government. So in furtherance of national development, Article 2103 permits the president and the executive arm of government to use the Ghana Armed Forces. The question we may have to ask ourselves is the development of is the improvement of our electoral processes and the final outcomes part of national development?
Right.
If we have an improved electoral process, does it speak to national development, or does it speak against the national development? So if in the wisdom of the what do you call, the executive, they decide to have the armed forces play a role in the electoral process, it's not even because they are thinking so, it's because the 1992 Constitution gives them room to do that. Apart from that, we have Act 1030. That is also very clear about what the membership of the National Security Council is, the membership of the Regional Security Council is, and the membership of the District Security Council is. And in all these councils, the armed forces is a member. Apart from these two acts, the world over, and in Ghana as well, institutions have their core mandates or their primary roles, and they also have a secondary role. And the Ghana Armed Forces is not any different. So yes, their core mandate or their primary role is to go to war, to protect the territorial integrity against external aggressors. But they also have a role against internal aggressors, which is the secondary role. Now, if a country goes to elections to find its leaders and whatever that will keep the political structure active and doing its mandated duties. And like we spoke about, you have maybe vigilantes, let's use it since that one is the commonest, or any other deviants we have in society that want to disrupt that process. That is internal aggression against a principal and very important state activity. So in that case, you have a role in there. That is basically what mandates or makes the presence of the military in the electoral process possible and legal. Now, with our current system in the country, we have a national election task force that is headed by the IGP. The membership includes the military. If we think they don't have a role to play, don't include them in the National Electoral Task Force membership. You can overlook, I mean, after all, as I mentioned earlier, we have various laws that we are not enforcing. So you can ignore Act 1030, for instance. That mandates them to play internal security roles. Remember, they don't play a front line role until they are invited in. And this was made very, very clear several times. In actual fact, I shared a joke with Dr. Emmanuel Christie some time back, that the CSO stampeded the military to come out with various statements. And of course, it played out quite well. But that is it, just to reinforce the fact that they have a role to play, but that role can only be played when they are invited in. Yet to say they have no role at all is begging the question. The electoral process, you normally hear when we are going to elections, we say, oh, we want the country to be peaceful during, and not before, during, and after the elections. So it means that it's a process. It covers a certain spectrum. And the threats that are within the spectrum vary. And based on the constraints of frontliners and the like, there may be the need to ask for some special expertise from some of the wings of the armed forces. The armed forces is not only made up of the army. We have the Navy. We have the Air Force. They have services they render to the Ghanaian populace. The Air Force, for instance, has helicopters. If they use them to transport electoral material, is it an electoral duty or not? When we talk about the maritime space, it's not limited to the sea. It includes all the inland waters. The Navy has seagoing equipment, and then some that are suitable for inland waters. And they are on the inland waters. They are in Bui. They are in Pando. And all along the Volta River. So, and we have islands in the Volta River, the lake. We have islands. Some Ghanaians don't know that. And there are Ghanaians living in those islands. And they need to vote. You can't use your V8 to drive there. The Navy takes your material to the place there. It's playing an electoral role. So it's not just when you have to have what do you call that? Somebody at the polling station bringing order alone. That constitutes electoral duty. They are public servants. Yeah, it's a public institution. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I want to complete your thought, but I want to follow up with Dr. Nuyama based on what you have said. You have made it clear that Act 203, right, falls within the executive arm of government, right? So what I want to ask from Dr. Kwaku Nuyama is, if Act 203 fall within the executive arm of government, it's the government who is the current executive who decides that, and they will use this act, right, in trying to call what people who are aligned to their political orientation to intimidate the opposition, right? Wouldn't you agree to that, Dr. Kwaku Nuyama? If Act 203 falls within the premise of the executive arm of government for them to make that decision, right? Wouldn't they be abusing that executive power that has been given to them under Act 203?
I mean, they could.
Before Doctor comes in, sorry, Doctor, it's Act 2103.
Okay. Act 2103, correct. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I haven't seen evidence that they've done that. Technically, you can do anything. But, you know, when you are the government, you are responsible for the security of the entire country. And you do things that makes that easier. You can't just, you know, recruit from your political base because you have to represent the whole country. And I think that, you know, the evidence shows that the military is professional enough, and it's there's always, you know, efforts to, you know, use it for other things. But the Ghanaian military is by and large professional, and there are sufficient institutional guidelines that exist to make it difficult for any one person to capture it for his own purposes. And I think that when you have bad leaders, they will try to do that. But I think that you know, at least I haven't seen that in the past few years, where there's always, remember under Rollins had his own the commandos that were doing stuff, all those things. But I think that by and large, our governments have been responsible when it comes to the way they use the military. The fact that the political parties have vigilantes tells you that it's not easy to use the military to do this kind of dirty work, or even the police. That's why they have the vigilantes. If it was easy to use the military because you are the executive, why does your party have vigilantes? And so it's,
yeah, but,
you know,
let me follow up with you. You were talking about the professionalism of the military, right? When we talk about the defense, we talk about the defense of the country in terms of security. You can say that, but when it comes to what civilian-military relationship, given the history of the military, that has not been something well to write home about, right? If you saw some of the videos, there was a man who was actually fighting two military officers with guns. So in terms of civilian-military relationship, the military has not been very professional in dealing with that. Looking at where we came from 1970 now, because the military have that aura around them that they can go out and do whatever they want to do to the civilians.
Yes, we have a long way to go. And I'm always horrified when I see military people wearing their uniforms in public, in civilian spaces. Then it's not even the regular khaki. They wear the camouflage, which is very intimidating, as if they are on some kind of battlefield. It shouldn't come to that. But we've come a long way. I've lived in Ghana when military people could commandeer your car and order you to do push-ups on the sidewalk, all kinds of stuff. We've come a long way, and it's still a lot of work to be done in terms of professionalizing the military. It's a job that the military alone cannot do. It is up to all of us, our politicians. We have to hold them accountable. We have to fund them properly. We have to train them properly. And we should refrain from asking them to do things that they are not meant to do. It's not their job.
But you're talking about resourcing. Why don't we rather resource the police rather than resourcing the military to deal with their addresses?
You have to do both. You have to walk and chew gum at the same time. What I'm saying is that if you want the military to, respect the civilians, you have to make sure that you train them properly. They have to understand the ethics. You have to understand professionalism, so that you don't put yourself in a place. There was a video where a bunch of military people in Obuasi were, in a shoving match with, the people who were trying to vote. You shouldn't be in that position. You should respect their uniform. And first of all, you shouldn't even be wearing the uniform in the civilian space. You are off base out there, that guy was carrying a gun, doing all those things. But some of it is training. Some of it is our own polka culture, where politicians whisper in their ears and people defer to them and all those things. It's up to all of us. If we want a different relationship, we have to model it. We have to put the institutional framework in place to make sure that the military understand what their role is. And we also have to build our police force. The police has to be, they are the front line, actually, in terms of domestic security. They are the front line. You shouldn't have to send soldiers to do work that your police force should be doing. And so, back to your question, we have to build that sector as well. The police people have to be properly paid. And we should stop talking down these institutions, because people don't respect the police, because every politician is getting up and talking about how corrupt they are, as if the politicians are not corrupt. So when we denigrate them, the public don't respect them, and then they cannot do their work. Then you have to go and bring the soldiers to come and do the work that the police should be doing. So we should train them properly, resource them well. They should respect themselves, but we should also respect them, and not score cheap polka points by assuming that everybody that is in a uniform is trying to violate somebody's human rights or is trying to extort money. Some of them do that, but that's not everybody in the military, and that's not everybody in the police as well.
All right. Let me come to Dr. Kwete, right? Now, if you are using the military to enforce civilian law and order internally, right, and they commit crimes during the enforcement of civilian law and order, like we saw at Ayawaso, we saw at Techima, do you hold them accountable in a civilian court or their court martial?
I think this question is truly for the general brigadier, because I think the army, in a sense, has its institutions and its way of dealing with their foremost thing is to protect us against external, invasion and maybe capture and destruction, and they say that. But in the election context, what they've also said to us is that it is not their duty to take over the police's work in election observation or keeping law and order, but they provide some kind of complement, support to the police. They work through the National Election Security Task Force, which is under the IJP. Okay, but other security agencies are embodied. And whatever they do, what I found interesting was that what role they would play in election work and so on has to be signed, agreed. There's an agreement they sign, and I'm told that a judge has to witness this. I don't know the extent to which that is, the practice. So the army, yes, is for external, protecting us against external threats and so on. That's their foremost things they talk about. But they are also deployed in internal situations, whether the police need them in the case of elections. They can't come on their own. But we've also known our history of military intervention and all that. And I think that's how I understand their practice, that internally, if they should engage in any situation where we feel there is escalating violence or the police needs to be, complemented or enhanced to do its work, the army could come in, but there are procedures to be followed. The second thing is that we've also heard about from the army that theirs is to preserve our territorial integrity, our sovereignty and unity. And so, but it's the external predominantly that they look at. So for me, these two are clear. Initially, we didn't understand, but increasingly the army keeps explaining what its role is and the fact that they are to protect democracy, and for that they work through the police. If they go beyond that, then people start talking about, have you taken over? Are you planning to take over? So all those questions also come up. So this is the context in which I understand the role they are playing in our democracy. That it's still the parties in charge, but law and order in elections is now we have the National Election Security Task Force, different security agencies coming together to ensure law and order. I think with time, probably when we've strengthened the system much better than we do, by opening local government and others, our democracy is flourishing, more institutions are there to ensure the rule of law and so on. Our electoral behavior might change. It wouldn't be to the extent that we have armed vigilantes and in a regional context where we've also had civil war and armed youth and all that and so on happening where they come in. So that's how I look at it.
All right, let me come to you, Brigadier, right? I have spoken to a couple of military officers who make the argument that African military does not have a military doctrine on war, right? Most of their engagement come from US peacekeeping, UN peacekeeping missions. They are more trained for peacekeeping missions rather than actually engaging in war, because in Africa, we don't really engage in any kind of war. Is it also a contributing factor why the military has accepted that idea of engaging in election task force, assuming that they were focused on war? If they were focused so much on war and not on UN peacekeeping mission, what would be their relationship with the civilian population?
All right. So we talk of doctrine, we're talking about the way of doing things. An institution's way of doing things is basically its doctrine. That's the simplest definition one can give to doctrine. And for one to say that the African armies do not have a doctrine of their own would need a lot more of work to convince me. Our legal system, we're still going by the Commonwealth, what do you call it? We still have the common law, which did not originate from the African continent. We all Ghanaians on this platform, we speak in English language. We know it's speaking Gan or Chi or something of that sort. So does it mean that, yes, we don't have a language that we use to communicate, to understand ourselves? It's not the case. And then maybe you have to commit some of your funds to let somebody really conduct a bit of research for you to disabuse your mind about the fact that we do not have doctrines of our own. It's not true. And I mean, it has not been true in the past, and it's not true today. There's still a lot of room for improvement. And even with security sector reform taking place, Ghana went through what we call the National Reconciliation Commission. One of the fallouts was for a reform of the security sector of the country, the security and defense sectors of the country. And Okwenu just died, General An Okwenu. And if you study the security sector reform aspects of this country, the sad history we had maybe in the 79, 81, that was one of the key personalities that used maybe not too many orthodox ways to get us to reform the defense sector to where, I mean, the stage you find it today. Dr. Nuama was talking about the level of professionalism of the Ghana Armed Forces, I mean, maybe acknowledged globally. You certainly, you're not satisfied with it, which is right. I mean, which is okay. But it didn't drop from the skies. You know, to build a culture, you have to be patient and incrementally ensure that at least you aim at improving. And that is what has taken place. That we have a stable democracy for the past 32 years, again, did not drop from the skies. It has been intentional. It's not that the persons who wear uniform cannot overthrow a government. But the fallout, as I mentioned, of the National Reconciliation Commission, which was not led by the military. Remember, it was led by the by a civil government. The honest on the panel, remember, General Eskim was sitting there. Go back, go read the report and find out some of the happenings today. You know, there's a historical basis for the improved human rights awareness among the members of the Ghana Armed Forces and the efforts being made by its leadership to sustain the respect of the human rights of the Ghanaians they are supposed to serve. We still have a very, very long way to go. We do not exist because of elections. But I think, I mean, I will be repeating myself if I say that the laws that govern the country, the constitution that we all want to sustain, to protect, gives a part, of duty to the military. If you are using the helicopters of the military, as I mentioned, they are performing that's military, and they are performing a duty that inures to the benefit of the electoral process. The constitution is very clear who the CNC of the Ghana Armed Forces is. Well, you can say that let's change it, but the CNC is the president of the day.
Yeah, you mean
the work over the abuse of the armed forces or the attempts to abuse the armed forces may just be a natural, maybe quite natural with leadership. But having a professional armed forces, it does not easily lend itself to abuse. And there's evidence to prove that. Because what do you call it? If you, the desire to retain power is there in every political party. If you're talking about the violence that have been associated with our elections, both political traditions have presided over violence. It's only those who have not yet won power, political power in this country, who can say they have not presided over violence. And they have all condemned violence in opposition. So it means that somehow, both political traditions, like the strongest ones that we have, the strongest traditional, traditions we have in the country today, abhor the misuse of military might when it comes to elections. And I believe that if we be patient with ourselves and incrementally try to look at the fact that we mainstreaming human rights awareness and training in the military institutions and making efforts at least to grow out of the history, the sordid history we didn't like of the past. And as I mentioned, at least you can point to improvement and then an incremental approach towards what may be termed as best practice. We just need to be a bit more patient and purposeful in seeking improvements, not only in the military, but in all segments of society, including the political class.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that submission very well. Thank you very much. Right. So let's go to our very last narrative. This to Dr.
Ben, we can't hear you.
Dr. Kwete, can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Dr. Nyama, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, so this is to Dr. Kwete, right? So I sent you the narrative on the post-election paradigm shift in political competition accountability, right? So let me read something for you. On the opening ceremony of the 75th Annual New Year School and Conference on Tuesday, January 9, 2024, at the University of Ghana, Legon, you were quoted by GhanaWare, an online news portal, for calling for a change in Ghana's hybrid system of governance. which you described as an amalgamation of democratic ideals and authoritarian remnants. You were quoted as stating, even though the current system has served the country well, it has, however, led the country to a point of stagnation. You were quoted further as stating, violence and mass unemployment in the country, among other signs, among others, are signs that the system has reached a point of stagnation and needs to be replaced with multi-party democracy. My question to you, can you explain to our listeners your assessment and rationale why the system has reached a stagnation point and how the system has served the country well? Can you explain to us? Dr. Kwete.
I don't know if he heard you.
Yeah, but he's still on mute. Can you hear me? Yeah.
After COVID, many people.
Were you able to hear me, Dr. Kwete? Were you able to hear me?
No, please repeat.
Okay, so I'm giving you a quote for you to comment on that. So on the opening of the 75th Annual New Year School and Conference on Tuesday, January 9th, what you were trying to say earlier on, so I'm just getting some of the quotes. On January 9, 2024, at the University of Ghana, Lagos, you were quoted by Ghana Web, an online news portal, for calling for a change in Ghana's hybrid system of governance, which you described as an amalgamation of democratic ideals and authoritarian remnants. You were quoted further as stating, even though the system, the current system, has served the country well, it has, however, led the country to a point of stagnation. And saying violence and mass unemployment in the country, among others, are signs that the system has reached a point of stagnation and needs to be replaced with multi-party democracy. My question to you, can you explain to our listeners your assessment and rationale for why the system has reached a stagnation point, and how has the system served the country well when, according to the USAID final report and your own conclusion remarks at the 75th conference, that the new patrilineal system of governance has effectively disenfranchised and excluded significant numbers of Ghanaians, women and men alike, from participating in a political life? How do you say that when historically people have been excluded from the political system, but you say the system has actually worked for some years or for some decades now? How is that possible?
Well, it's a straightforward thing to me that we've had 32 years of this regime, okay, stable. The stability of democracy has ever been 32 years until the Fourth Republic. The First Republic, by 64, one-party state. And thereafter, we had the military, 66, 69, 72, 69 to 72, the multi-party system collapsed under military force in the first school, NLC, SMC, AFRC. Then we went into the Third Republic, 27 months. So if you look at the period that I've mentioned, democracy, multi-party democracy was pretty much short-lived. And it's the army. And then they were authoritarian. I mean, Rawlings is, when the PNDC took over in 82, then you had some stability. But we should remember that it wasn't only the the structural adjustment programs, but they embarked upon far-reaching local government reforms because the local government system had collapsed. And there were a whole lot of intervention by IMF and the World Bank and others, which was saying develop the market and all that. But out of that came the pressures that led us to the 1992 Constitution. It's always been a resistance to military rule, whether you look at it under the Champong, the union government and the changes that came and all that. So in that context, when the pressures mounted for the third wave of democratization, 1992, or from 1990 to 92, there were real demands, and the constitution consultative body appointed to look at how do we go into multi-party democracy and so on. What I found to be interesting was that we then said that, look, multi-party democracy will be parliament and the presidency, executive president, period. But the executive president monopolizes control over the executive arm of government. And we even said parties should not participate in local elections and they wouldn't have spaces and so that. Look back now, 32 years, everybody admits the parties are in local government. Okay, they sponsor candidates, both the MPP and DC. And we've also seen a system where minority parties, as we call them, they don't like to be called small parties or something, are all practically not represented in parliament. And then those who monopolize the executive power and then thought that they would control the whole of local government have themselves had problems governing local government. The fight between chief executives and members of parliament is legendary. The control that chief executives endure from financiers or their patrons who nominated them and so on. It's a mess. And yet we think that this is the best system and we should retain it. So what I was saying as the New Year's School is that, yes, probably we got stability, political stability. Okay, but it also occurred at a time that the whole world frowned on coups and so on and so forth. But that is it. Local government is not working. A survey that CDD did post-election 2020 survey, 75% of the respondents said the local government system is not working. And systematically, we've seen how low a turnout it is for local elections. And we also know that actually, informally, the two parties we call the duopolies sponsor candidates to local elections, and therefore they have a presence, informal, against the law, against the constitution, but no action is taken. We laugh, hey, they are there, and so on and so forth. So this kind of system is not working. It lacks the institutions that would enable the needs of the local government, local areas to be met. They've talked about a lot of corruption. Now we've seen that armed vigilantes are quite flourishing in those areas and so on. So when you do a critical assessment, you ask yourself, this hybrid, that's why I called it a hybrid system. Fourth Republic is not a fully fledged multi-party democracy. And I think my dear brother Kweku Nyama spoke about it earlier. So when you put it together then, what you see is that we are having real serious challenges. The institutions that we should have to facilitate local economic development and transportation, create the jobs, basic water and other things, and so forth, have failed to deliver. And all we see is that there's a lot of fight between chief executives and MPs, because MPs chief executives tend to have a short tenure, 4 years, at the discretion of their patrons and the president, and then out they go. And so they like to go to become MPs. And some of them, the funds allocated, the common fund and so on, it's what they use to buy their way into parliament, where they have a longer tenure in politics. Then, worst of all, you are told that the amount of money allocated for local government and their development and needs and so on, which goes through the common fund, hardly gets there. So it's a mess. And then you have a situation where, yes, we've had stability, but the development dividends, the exclusion, we set up a system that said local assemblies, there will be youth groups, women, people with disability, and various others will be elected. They had a quota, 30% quota of the membership. It didn't work. It hasn't worked. And yet we want to hold on to the system. So the argument I was making is that the system that hasn't worked has been corroborated. That view has been corroborated by consistent local government elections that is less than, on the average, it's about 34%. Compare that to party elections, minimum 45. This is the first time in these elections that we have it below 70 and it's around 60 something. I didn't check, 63 or something %. Extremely low in our history. And we must ask ourselves why. So the public is speaking, the electorate is speaking, that the way the system is designed, it hasn't worked. Some people think it's a rejection of multi-party politics. And I just dispute that. I just say we haven't read it well. They are telling you the same people who vote highly, okay, in party elections, have continued to tell us the system is not delivering. And I tell them it's not a full democracy, it's a hybrid democracy. For example, there is no institution that would regulate parties, see to the evolution or development of our multi-party system, the institutions required to protect our civil liberties and make sure that the public resources are used to grow the economy, create jobs, healthcare, and so on. They haven't happened. Even under the government that has been voted out, ambitious projects and so on did not materialize or are not sustainable. So we need to look at it. Should we go back to the military? Should we go back to a one-party state? Should we look at authoritarianism and so on? And I said, no, the thing about democracy is that it also strengthens the state and its institutions, the rule of law, the regulation, and so on. And party funding, how could we have a situation where we are told that to get into parliament, you need about $1 million equivalent? That's CDD 7, and so on. And nothing happens to you. So the system, the institutions that have been set to ensure that, yes, parties could rule, but there are also institutions of public interest, state, enforcing the rule of law. We don't have that. An individual can decide whether you should obey or disobey the rule of law. And what kind of system is that? So the point I was then making is that if you take the two parties, it was the NPP that initiated under President Akufo-Addo that spoke about opening the system to parties. It's very difficult because Article 55(3) says if you want to open local government to parties, you need a referendum. 40% of the electorate, total number, must vote yes, and 40% must vote, and 75% must say yes, open the system. And what kind of thing is that? So why don't we have parties that will ensure that we don't get 40% of voters? You can change the system. And how do you get the 75% in a highly competitive field like this where you need to build consensus? All those mechanisms have failed. And if we continue to sustain that, now we have a situation where the youth are calling for military coups. Not me saying, that's what some say. They've demonstrated and so on, because they don't see democracy delivering the dividend. How could you have a large graduate unemployed graduates association growing? And so there is something sick about the system. We need to reform it. Constitutional reforms then said, keep parties out. And I said, look, where is the evidence that tells us that the more we keep parties out, the greater the opportunities we have to grow our economy, meet local government needs, and so on? There's no evidence. And yet we are saying, oh, parties are so bad. And there are institutions that regulate parties. The institutions that prevent the public service, the local government service, they don't even get their share of the common fund. So it's probably give us stability, but not the development and the transformations that we need. And I do not think that we cannot achieve that within a multi-party democracy. You must put the institutions in place. Look at what happens to American politicians who wouldn't declare the sources of funding used in their campaigns. Go to Germany. I mentioned Germany, how Chancellor Kohl left office because of campaign finance not fully disclosed. It happens across Europe. You must account for where you got the money. Here, you don't. And you are even celebrated for not being able to account. It means you are smart. It's jeopardizing the Fourth Republic stability. And also people are turning away from multi-party democracy. But we have tried to explain to them, for example, could we establish a multi-party democracy commission that could first ask us to assess this exclusion of parties and their prohibition and so on in the last 32 years. What goals were anticipated, okay, to be achieved? None of those. That will be a more united nation, will be less polarized, development will come everywhere. If you read the literature, some of the reports and books, Kamnahoe and others who looked at the justification for the local government system excluding parties, it's like you were looking at 1964 and some of the judgments. It's never happened. So why do we continue to hold on to this? And we do not have anything but to say elect MMDCs, that is metropolitan, municipal, and district chief executives. Also, without elections, after there is that patent failure of exclusion of parties from contesting assembly elections formally controlled and so on, and that we think which hasn't worked. So you have a lot of parties there. In fact, you find caucuses referring to themselves as NDC or MPP. It's against the constitution and no action is taken whatsoever. So how do we expect our nation to be transformed? And the idea that if we added election of chief executives without parties, we are going to resolve the issues, the challenges we are having with economic growth and development and transformation in the local areas is going to improve. I do not see the evidence. So I said, set up a multi-party democracy commission and task them, first of all, to assess the system we put in place. Evaluate the impact. Has it moved us to our goals, or is there a big disappointment? If not, then please don't rush us into saying elect chief executives now. So you added to the election of assembly members that hasn't worked dysfunctionally. The state is to control 1/3 of that. So this is where I ended. And I thought, I said that we shouldn't rush to continue to impose systems and ideologically hate parties when those who are really making these proposals are themselves in parties.
Yeah, okay.
And they haven't transformed the country. They've not transformed the economy.
Yeah, let me follow up with Dr. Nuyama in terms of Dr. Akwete's submission, right? The system that he is talking about has been stable, right? What he is talking about in terms of transformation would not inure to the benefit of the political actors. What we've seen recently, where the Speaker of Parliament was trying to stick his guns, right? And we saw what happened, right? Parliament was completely shut down. So the point is that a transformation will not inure to the benefit of the political actors. So for them, it's just maintain a status quo going forward. What do you think about that?
Well, so I agree with everything that Dr. Akwete said. Our democracy has stagnated, but there's a reason for that. Look, so we go back to the 1992 Constitution. Remember, the 1992 Constitution was created for Rawlings to extend his rule. He had been in power 11 years, was transitioning to democracy, but essentially it was NDP continuing all the way. So look at how the Constitution was designed. We picked the stuff from Britain and then stuff from the United States. We didn't pick the good things in those models. So you have the parliamentary system that allows the president. Is in the parliamentary system, you have the executive is picked from parliament, right? But then we have the American system of presidency, which allows the president to appoint his cabinet from parliament. And so parliament effectively becomes useless because they cannot hold the president accountable when you have people in parliament who are hoping to join the president's cabinet. And so you have that incestuous nature. You also have gaps in the Constitution that doesn't cap the number of judges you can have in the Supreme Court. And so that you were talking about what happened with the Speaker. The Supreme Court is never going to be able to do any work against an incumbent president because the president can appoint as many judges as he wants. And that's a weakness. And so this is a constitution that was designed to allow Rawlings to have as much power as possible. What I'm worried about is the fact that other people who have assumed the presidency have enjoyed using these loopholes to maximize their control over the system. So, for example, why didn't Kufuor push for a change, an amendment to the Constitution? Why are we still living in a system where district chief executives are still appointed by the president. The Akufo-Addo tried to do that with a referendum. For some weird reason, the NDC said no. I still don't understand why they said no, but we have to expand the political space. We have to bring more people in. We need accountability. The way you improve the system is by growing it. And so I agree with Dr. Akwede's point that you got to allow political parties to compete even at the local level. That's how you develop these institutions. So we have a system where, essentially the supply chain, the value chain begins at the parliamentary level. Where are they supposed to get experience from? If the first time you're running for office, you run as an MP. In the United States, for example, people would have run to be on city library boards. You start from ANC, small things. You hear Americans saying somebody cannot get elected as dog catcher. You run for small things, and then you grow, you scale up. So by the time anybody's running for a national office, they've had 3 or 4 or 5 different opportunities to get better. You have to develop these systems. You got to develop the value chain, open it up. It's not going to kill us. Let's have competition. Let's have a context of ideas at the local level, scale it up to the regional level before they come to the national parliament, and also reform the constitution, separate the executive. If you're going to have an American-style presidency, do it the right way. Separate the executive from the legislature and from the judiciary so that we have clear boundaries. You shouldn't be sitting in parliament as an MP and working for a president that you're supposed to be holding accountable. That's not going to work. If you want to do it the British way with the parliamentary system, then have a prime minister who can be fired by his peers. In Britain, the prime minister is only primus inter pares. He can be fired by his peers with a vote of no confidence. We don't have that in Ghana. So we elect a president for 4 years, but then we give him power to kill parliament and to control the Supreme Court. That's why our system has not produced the political dividends that we expect. The economic dividends are a completely different matter. As long as you have a duopoly and they have this alternating shifts, there's no pressure on them to come up with any new ideas. You saw this election, both Baumia and Mahama were talking marginally. We need real solutions. They were talking as if, the digital economy is different from a 24-hour economy. The fact that they thought that these were separate tells you where they are. They don't understand the country's problems. You need big ideas, but that's not where we are. We have a two system where you chop and I chop, and then the people who are in the party, if they have money, then they become the nominees, and we shut out a third force. I think we missed a boat. So the NDC could have been the third force. Going back to one of your earlier questions, it could have been the third force, because remember that comes from the Rawlings tradition, but then they essentially co-opted. I think they co-opted the Nkrumahs. And so there is no, because there will, go back to 1979, there's an Nkrumah party, there's a Busia Dankwa tradition, and then Rawlings comes in. Rawlings is probably the most consequential, political leader in Ghana after Nkrumah, because he was in power for 19 years, really. So he could have, presented us with a third way, but because they are left of center, they've ended up co-opting the Nkrumahs, and we're back to this duopoly. And as long as you have a two-party system, that's not really competing, because everybody gets their time. You're not really going to produce political dividends or economic dividends as well.
All right, let me come to you, Brigadier, right? What are the security implications of this stagnation long term? Because you see that there's some sort of disillusionment among the youth. There's mass unemployment, there's poverty. What are the security implications of some of these things? Then we see our democracy gradually, or multi-party democracy gradually stagnating. What are some of the security implications? Because the national security minister some time ago talked about how cases go to the Supreme Court, and cases are always ruled in the interest of the government, right? So we are not seeing any real transformation, right? So what are the national security implications of some of these decisions?
All right. So as you see, I mean, we just experienced a few days ago, and then still experience them. We're not done, most likely, with the violence yet. Ghana may just be experiencing her own should I say, version or a subdued version of the Gen Z's effect that the rest of East Africa experienced this year. So we really have to make sure the system works. We have opted to have the political parties vie for political office. We tried the one-party rule, we tried the military rule, we even attempted a union government. And we thought that all this were not suitable for us. And we decided to go again for what Dr. Newama was talking about, a certain version that makes the executive arm of government very strong. It's not beyond us to have it reviewed. And I believe that under Atamiel's, President Atamiel's, we had the Constitution Review Commission. Right. And we can get back to at least a drawing board and then see what can we do of the work that was done, either to improve upon that and make it acceptable to ourselves, or maybe do it all over again. As I mentioned a bit earlier, if we insisted that we should have reforms in the defense and security sector, it is also important to have reforms in the political sector. It shouldn't be that the focus is only on the duty bearers when it comes to the issue of security and defense. They also deserve to have that done in terms of the leadership that we have leading these sectors. For the youth, in natural fact, I think our last population census places our youth percentage in about 61%.
Yeah.
Unemployment is still very high. You would always hear the political parties bandy around all sorts of lofty ideas about creating of employment. They are given the opportunity and none of them is able to do anything better. But as I mentioned, I believe that it's not beyond us. We should be able to, be honest with ourselves, practice a bit of strategic patience, and then come out with solutions that would help us across the board.
All right, thank you very much. Time is fast spent. Well, let me get your closing remarks, Dr. Newama. Dr. Akweti has sent me a message that he has to attend to something. So let's get your closing remarks, looking forward beyond 2024 in terms of what is going to happen in between these 4 years that Dr. Newama is going to be in power. What do you think that we should be doing going forward?
I think we should be putting pressure on him, but we should be careful not to kill our democracy. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. You have to keep the system that you have and figure out ways of making it more responsive, more accountable, and particularly it has to listen to, our political system has to take input from our young people who are actually struggling. And you were asking a question about the security implications of a non-performing political system. You can easily walk yourself into a coup if the young people realize that they have nothing to lose because they've been left out of the system. They can become, they can cause all kinds of problems for the country. So we have to do that. I think Mahama is going to try the best that he can. He's made some promises that he's probably not going to be able to keep. Some of the problems are structural. He can solve those, but he has to make an effort and he has to learn from his own time as president as well as from the mistakes of the government that he's replacing. And so if he does that, he should be fine. But we need a major rethink of the system. And I just hope that in 4 years, if we can keep it going, in 2018, I think we get a chance to start with somebody new because Mahama is not going to be running again. I don't know if his vice president will run, but even if she runs, it would be a chance for us to get a woman president. I don't know if that's, but of course the MPP, so we're going to get somebody new, and we're going to get a chance to restart this engagement. But hopefully we can have a national dialogue, which is one of the things that he's promised, a national dialogue about how to solve our problems. We have a lot of problems. There are small ones and there are big ones. The small ones are easy to solve, but there are deeper problems that require everybody. And I just hope that as the MPP goes back into opposition, they learn to be a loyal opposition and they learn to compete on the basis of ideas, not on the basis of shouting and obstructionism and all that stuff. They need to be in there. Muhammad's problem is going to be holding back his own people who are, euphoric, and they think that somehow this is a coup d'etat. That, because when you have such a big mandate, you can do everything. You cannot do everything. And even if you can do everything, you should exercise restraint and show leadership to avoid the excesses that we've seen in the past. That's not going to help us at all. If people go about, breaking the law because they think their party is in power, that is a recipe for a disaster. But he also has to speak to the entire country. He got votes from all over the country. So this is not just some small, group of people that have elected him. He got votes from all over the country. So he should be a national leader for everybody. And he has to come to the table with real ideas and real solutions to the problems that has almost killed our democracy, because democracy is only good if it can solve problems. And I think that for young people, I think they run out of patience, and very soon they're going to decide that it's probably not going to work, that democracy is never going to deliver the dividends. We vote all the time. As I've said before, elections in Africa and in Ghana has become clouds that bring no rain for the people. And so we can't keep doing that. If we have elections, we should have changes and sustainable changes. And at the top of that list should be some type of economic relief. Otherwise, sooner or later, we're going to call on the military to step in, and that we are very, very, very close to that. Ghana has a history of that, the military coming in as a cavalry when the politicians have failed. So that's the thing. People always think that the military just take power for the sake of power. Most of the time, they come in when the people are fed up with the politicians, and so we have to watch that, and we have to pray that our nation never goes through that again.
All right, thank you very much. So let me come to you, Brigadier. Now, if you saw what happened in South Africa, you saw the youth came in to vote. That sent the ANC into the minority. They have to form a coalition government. And we see the same thing happening in this election in Ghana, that the young people came out and they voted and they took the MPP back to opposition, right? So what do you think we should be doing going forward in terms of the current government and future government to bring about this transformation that we need in our political system? Like you said, we don't need the reform only in the security sector, but in our political space also altogether.
Yeah. So the realization is that we are not done with nation building yet. We are still in the process of nation building. We get it from the utterances, of those vying for power. We get it in the utterances of even our traditional institutions, our traditional authorities, that nation building is still work in progress for us. In this recent elections, for instance, we had quite a number of institutions, CSOs and what have you, inciting the population against some institutions of state. The EC, inciting the population against the security services, especially the military and the like. If we are done with nation building, that will not have happened, because these institutions are the possessions of the population. They are not authorities unto themselves. They exist to serve the population. And if the population is really saying that they belong to a nation, they would not be inciting segments of that same population against these state institutions. So talking about how dangerous it is, we'll just be begging the question. We hope that the various institutions that may lead the charge, such as the NCC, of course, also asking for responsible conduct of those institutions that were incited against. The good news is that the president, of course, you can always take the word of a politician with a pinch of salt. The president-elect has promised not to abuse the majority he has in parliament. He has made an observation that this 4 years is a legacy trip for him. I believe he has seen the hardships of being in opposition, and he may not wish that for his enemies, let me put it that way, his opponents. Let's try to support him and encourage him to, stay the course. And if he does, he spoke about consensus building. If he does stick to his word, I believe that somehow the transformation that we expecting may be realized one way or the other.
All right, all right. Thank you.
The rest
very
of us,
much.
of course, will still have to remain very vigilant, you know,
Okay.
and then
Okay.
we must necessarily take deliberate actions, deliberate steps to have a better and functioning political system. It will not drop from the skies. It must be deliberate. It must be intentional and not lip service. We shouldn't be saying it just because we want to satisfy our oversight, international oversight institutions.
Okay.
No, we should be doing it because we believe it, and because we believe that it will lead us to where we want to find ourselves. But I mean, just before I say goodbye to you all, you realize that in Ghana, our theaters have collapsed. So we don't have theaters again, cinema. I mean, when you take all the cinemas that used to exist across the country, they have all collapsed.
Yeah, I thought that
we don't have a discourse again.
That conference center has collapsed or is still working. The national
is
theater,
there. I mean, but we don't have any theater taking place.
Yeah.
We don't have the discourse. So we don't have so much in terms of entertainment. And then a human being needs a bit of entertainment. So elections every 4 years also constitute a volley of entertainment that comes around. So when you hear, those of you outside, when you hear us making noise in Ghana, it's just a form of entertainment. We always pull out of it. So don't worry too much when you hear us make noise.
All right, but one thing is that this year election, we've discounted the role that the online media play in terms of the insults and other things. I think maybe in future survey we should take a look at that, the role that what social media actually played, right, in our election. But on this note, we shall explore that later on. On this note, we've come to the end of another edition of Sankofa African Affairs. We hope to see you next week Friday, for our last session, which is going to talk about the sexual and gender-based violence, right? So we hope to see you next week. On this, I say, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Come on, thank you for joining us, and Brigadier, thank you for joining us. Those of our observers who came to join us today, thank you so much, very well. Hope to see you next week. All right, enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.